Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Artrage 6 video. Today I'm going to be looking at depth and gloss. These are two new sliders that are available in the oil brush. The oil brush has always been my favorite tool in the entire program, Artrage, and the new tools give you greater range, greater flexibility, more variety, and more realism. So all of those things are awesome, obviously. And what I'm trying to do in this video is show you how that new tool works really well with some custom brush, with palette knife, and the interaction of all of those things can make for a kind of painting that I have not been able to make before in Artrage. So to prove my point, I'm using one of my gouache still life paintings that I did all at Prima, just kind of like, you know, one of those nights in the spring when it was cold and I wanted to do some painting. Painted some winter fruit, and that's what you see up in the top right corner. And I'm using the oil brush with the setting that is very stiff. The bristles are really, really, really stiff. So that's kind of like, you know, a brush that maybe you forgot to clean, and the bristles are either maybe short or they're long, but kind of firm. And then I'm setting the depth really deep. So it's sort of like loading a brush really, really full of paint, but the bristles don't move very much. And what happens is you get a lot of peaks and valleys. So you get some of the bristles are scraping through all the way, and you're getting no pigment. And then in other parts of the mark, you're getting these really nice little peaks or mountains of pigment. And setting up the brush this way is really cool because it lets some of your underpainting show through. It gives a really rough and textural, messy mark, and that's all kind of the way I like to paint. And then you can kind of play with it from there. So, you know, at this point in the painting, now I'm using a palette knife and a little less firm oil brush to kind of quiet it down a little bit. My initial paint-in was kind of like a rough, intense kind of approach, and I wanted to give now a little bit more variety and softness. So playing with a little bit less stiff oil brush, but also playing with the palette knife as a painting tool. So in order to do that, you just set the palette knife to have a loading to 100% or whatever percent you prefer, but that lets you scrape paint across your virtual surface using the palette knife. And what's really neat is that those peaks and valleys from your oil brush work, those brush strokes and that paint thickness is going to interact with your palette knife in a way that is realistic. As you can see, as I'm painting on this little mandarin or whatever it is, with the palette knife, it picks up paint in a really interesting way, creating a richer texture than was available to us before. Now back to the oil brush, and I've set the depth and the gloss back to kind of like a more subdued level, but I'm keeping the stiffness high and the thinners down low, and that's letting me paint with a lot of paint body, getting a lot of that textural mark, allowing me to build up multiple layers of texture as I go in and try to bring a little bit more volume into these forms. So again, I'm looking at creating more roundness in these spherical objects, but also create a little more variety in the color temperatures and also the color palette. So trying to let some blues and greens and peaches and pinks come through. You know, you just have to make sure your values are accurate, meaning you're light and dark, but aside from that, you can play with color as much as you want and it'll always read well. So in this case, I'm just playing with all kinds of little tweaks to kind of make it a little extra fun. And now I'm playing with the custom brushes on top of what I've established. The custom brushes that I've made so far are all a little softer in the mark that they make than that real scratchy oil brush that I started with. So I'm using these custom brushes both for variety of mark making, but I'm also using them to tone down and to mix some of the colors together. So where I may have had a real bristly and sharp transition between my values, so my light to midtone, my midtone to dark, etc., or my warm to cool or whatever. Now I'm allowing myself to play a little bit more in the nuance in between and get some soft, subtle transitions. And a lot of times in a painting, there's a seeking for me. Like I'll play with edges for a little while, I'll play with values for a little while, and I'm not one of those artists that just kind of paints the same way all the time. I think some subjects require a little different approach, you know? Just like you talk to your child in a way that's different than you talk to your spouse, or you talk to your friend in a different way than you talk to your parents. And I think that's true in painting too. You know, there's certain, I think certain artists will kind of paint the same way no matter what they're painting, but I do that to a degree. But I think it's also important to be able to respond to your subject and treat it like its own thing. And for me, there's a certain feeling I'm trying to accomplish here. And so that feeling I can get at through the edges that I create, whether they're soft or hard. I can get at it through the marks that I make, which are either big and bold, a lot of bravado, or small and delicate. I can use big, thick, wide marks, or I can use tiny little, intricate marks. And I think there's a time and place for all of those. And there's a time and place within every painting for all of those as well. And right now I'm trying to work with some of those smaller and more delicate marks, but I'm still trying to keep a sharp, angular kind of attitude about them. And this is probably one of my favorite parts of the painting, where I feel like I have a good base. I have a couple different layers that I've been working with, and the value structure is good, and the sense of light and light direction is fine. And I get to now get in there and start adding things to make it feel like it's really present, really there. And this is, like I said, it's the fun part because it's really rewarding. It's like, if you're an instructor, it's like kind of the late stage of a workshop or something, where all the students have got the concepts and now it's just starting to come to life. And there's also sort of a fluency that happens when you're working with your tools, and you're like, you've been playing with palette knife, been playing with the custom brush, been playing with the oil brush, and you kind of know what each one can do with the settings that you've kind of aligned yourself to in the piece, and then you kind of now know which ingredient to add to make it feel like you want it to feel. So that's happening now. There's a little bit of redrawing, reshaping the volumes of the spheres, and a little bit of that, but mostly it's not about drawing. It's mostly not about proportion. Mostly it's just about edges and mark making and style, and trying to make sure that, of course, the values are reading correctly, but more than that, I'm trying to get a feeling that's similar in tone to the feeling that I created in the original gouache painting. And what I'm pretty excited about and very surprised about, actually, is how compelling this process has been in translating a traditional piece to a digital format. I think Artrage is one of those deceptive programs. Like, you open it up and it looks very light and very simple, and maybe even young with the bright greens here, kind of splashed across the UI. But it's not simple at all, and certainly it's simple to use, and just like a paintbrush is simple to pick up and use. But a paintbrush can be used to do work in a kindergarten classroom, but a paintbrush can also be used to paint a Rembrandt, and I think that's how Artrage is, in that it has a range to be accessible and usable by children happily. I work with kids all the time that use Artrage, and they love it. But it's also a tool that you can see have profound professional outcomes, and that's kind of what I'm trying to access here. Is, I painted this gouache painting, it sold immediately, and it was a painting that had a lot of, for whatever reason, it grabbed people's attention, and I loved this style. Like, it felt good in my heart, this is what I was going for. But you never know how people are going to respond, and they loved it. And I thought, how cool would it be to see how Artrage could handle this subject? And I think it handles it brilliantly. So please take a look at this software and see what it can do. I think it's definitely an underdog software when it comes to digital painting, and I think it's totally underappreciated. It's one of the best digital art tools I've ever seen. So give it a shot. Please check out my channel, check out Instagram, check out Patreon, check out all the things that you can do to get involved with this community of art. And thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Take care.